Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
Lowe's knows Sundays are for football, so tackle your home improvement projects by Saturday and earn your Sunday with great deals on LG and Bosch appliances, select Bounty and Swiffer cleaning products, and more. Then once your to-do list is done, get ready to kick back, relax, and enjoy the game. Shop in-store or online now and earn your Sunday with help from Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1050 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in.
Before I get to the mailbag questions this week, I just want to remind you guys to subscribe to the Late Round newsletter. It's absolutely free. All you got to do is head to lateround.com, click newsletter, and submit your email address. That's it. In that newsletter during the season, you get the 15 transactions email, you'll get the weekly data dump that I publish on Twitter and Blue Sky, and you'll get a nice recap of everything from David Kitchen at the end of the week. Out of season, I send out studies, I do other research articles that I send out in that newsletter all the time. That's lateround.com and then click newsletter. Okay, now let's get to these mailbag questions. The first question this week is from Carter on Patreon. It says, I saw you still have Odunze ranked as a wide receiver 1 this week. Feels tough to just send him back out there after a bagel against Cincinnati's defense. It feels like he just hasn't been a priority for that offense since the bye, but I would love to believe he's coming back. What's giving you that confidence to keep him ranked up there? There's actually a lot to unpack here. Let's first just start with Odunze and what's been going on with him. The Bears had a week 5 bye. So they played weeks 1 through 4, they had a bye, and then they played since then. That gives us a really nice and clean 4-game split. 4 games pre-bye, 4 games post-bye. In the pre-bye games, Odunze was averaging a 27% target share per game rate and 19.9 PPR points per game. Post-bye, those numbers have fallen to 20% and 7.2. That's a pretty dramatic shift. Now, it should be noted that Odunze has been playing through a heel injury. I don't want to completely dismiss that. But there are some secondary numbers here that don't paint the most favorable picture. For one, I've talked about this before, but he's seen a 57% catchable targets rate over his last 4. That was 67% during his first 4. But also fantasy points data, it shows that Odunze's first read target share, it's fallen from 32% to just 18% in these 4-game splits. And on top of that, the Bears have just been more run heavy. From weeks 1 to 4, they ranked 10th in dropbacks over expected rate. They've been 27th over their last 4. Now, to be fair, last week, Odunze had a first read target share of just 10.5%. That's bringing down these numbers quite a bit. Now, they're still lower than the first 4 weeks, but maybe not quite as low as they initially sound. Like in week 8, his first read target share was still a solid 28%. But people keep talking about that Cincinnati matchup like he should have gone off. And yes, he should have had a much better game. I'm not really defending his poor performance, which included a pair of drops. But DJ Turner has been really good for Cincinnati this year. I talked about that in the 50 Transaction Show earlier this week. It's not as good of a matchup, especially in hindsight, as people generally think. But look, this is all not really that good for Rome Odunze. But I'm willing to guess that the truth, it lies somewhere in the middle. That the first 4 weeks, they were a little bit fluky. Even though I do think he's a good player. And in the last 4, they've just really had some lows that are going to be tough to repeat. I have Odunze right in line with consensus this week at wide receiver 11. But I could rank him all the way down to like wide receiver 13 to like the wide receiver 15 range, just given the way my tiers are set up. It's really just the fact that we've got teams on bye, teams with really good wide receivers, and the Bears have a good matchup. They have a really good team total too. But yeah, these are all things to be concerned about with Rome Odunze right now. And remember, Luther Burden was sidelined last week with a concussion. I still think there's a legitimate chance that we see him gain a larger role as the season goes on. That's going to hurt Olamide Zaccheaus most. But any talented player seeing more work will impact everyone else in that offense. So the trend is concerning. But I don't think week 9 is a lock to happen every single week. It was a tough matchup. And just the week prior, things looked fine for Rome Odunze. I just think we're staring at more volatility now than we were at the beginning of the year. Because the offense is just prioritizing other players more. And it also doesn't help that they've leaned more on the run. This next question is also from Patreon. It's from Andre. It says, "Hey JJ, for those of us likely to make the playoffs, is it too early to stash defenses? If not, are there any you would recommend? Thanks." So I answer a question like this one once a year, and this is my once per year time answering it. My stance is that I believe people overrate the whole stashing defenses thing for a few reasons. Number one, defenses are volatile. Not only could that defense just not be in as good of a spot once the playoffs actually hit, but the way defenses score, they're not amazingly predictable. You can stream and you can come away with a really strong defensive performance in fantasy through streaming. I'm talking like defense 2 in points per game, defense 3 in points per game. We do that every year over on Living the Stream. That's not what I'm talking about here. Part of the reason you can do that is because even good defenses have bad fantasy performances. So it's not that hard to just make up for that by using defenses against bad offenses. And there's obviously some luck involved here. Like a defense gets an interception, they just happen to return that for a touchdown. That's a huge turnaround for your fantasy team. Or a special teams unit returning a kick. There's luck involved with turnovers in general. We know that defensive performances can be volatile. So even if you love the matchup, it's not like it's a guarantee that that defense is going to score a ton of points. Number 2, there's a cost in holding that defense on your bench. If you're stashing a random defense, that means you're not stashing something else, like a running back handcuff. And the upside of that handcuff far outweighs the upside of that defense in a given week. And then number 3, don't underestimate your ability to find a defense on the waiver wire, maybe just like a week before the playoffs, or even during the playoffs. Remember that things change in the NFL, and what looks like a mediocre matchup right now could actually be a good matchup later in the season, like if there's a quarterback injury. And also, don't forget that in most leagues, when the playoffs hit, you're competing with fewer teams in your league on the waiver wire. That makes it easier to get a streaming defense. So I think week 10 is way, way too early to stash a defense. Week 13, week 14, fine. But we've got a long way to go still. And I'd rather use that bench spot on a more valuable position with a whole lot more upside. This next question is from Patreon. It's from Axel. It says, "What do you think about Marvin Harrison Jr. now that Jacoby Brissett seems to be the Cardinals starter for the rest of the season?" I've seen a lot of pro Marvin Harrison Jr. talk on my timeline this week after his performance against the Cowboys. And it really was an awesome performance. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a good wide receiver. But I also think that we have to remember that Dallas, it's quite literally the best matchup imaginable for wide receivers, specifically perimeter wide receivers. Harrison finished week 9 with a 34.5% target share. That was by far the highest of his season. He scored 22.6 PPR points. That was the best of his season too. He played with Jacoby Brissett the game prior when they faced the Packers. And maybe his concussion from the previous week, maybe it played a role there. But he had just an 18% target share and fewer than 8 PPR points. So like for as good as he was in week 9, I'm not just ready to say, okay, this is his team now. He's just going to dominate rest of season. According to Fantasy Points data, Marv had a first read target share of 56% against the Cowboys. 56%. In week 7, the previous game that he played, that number was about 27%. Which for the record, with Kyler this year, Harrison Jr. was at like a 20% first read target share. So things are getting better. I would say in this small sample, this is an upgrade overall for sure. Like even when you adjust for the context of that Dallas game, yeah, I highly doubt that we see that week in and week out. But it's good that we have multiple games now where he's getting looked at first and where his target shares have been usable. The next question is, what about rest of season? What about moving forward? And according to my numbers, Arizona has a very average rest of season schedule. In the fantasy playoffs, though, they get the Texans in week 15. That's a tough matchup. They get the Falcons in week 16, which has not been the best matchup in the world for wide receivers this year, and then Cincinnati in week 17. I just talked about how wide receivers don't automatically dominate against the Bengals. So I don't know. I'm excited because I do think Brissett is an upgrade for this offense right now. But I'm tempering my expectations if people think that like last week is going to happen again each and every week. If he was at 12.5 PPR points per game with Kyler, maybe we see that jump up by like a point, maybe a 1.5 with Jacoby Brissett. That seems reasonable to me. This next question is from Joe on Patreon. It says, is Luke Musgrave trash? I just traded Gadsden last week because I already had Kraft. Scrambling for a tight end. First off, that is some terrible luck. Second, no, he's not trash. He's just not Tucker Kraft. We haven't really seen Luke Musgrave in a significant role since his rookie season. This year, he has just one game with a 50% route share, and it was at 50%. He saw 9% target share in that game. Last year, he had one game with a 50% route share. It was at 52%. He had a 5% target share in that game. His rookie year, though, he played frequently as Green Bay's main pass-catching tight end. He was a rookie, so we have to take all this with a grain of salt, but he had 8 games with at least a 70% route share. He was often in the teens with his target share, and he hit a 20% target share just once. Again, he was a rookie that year, and I don't think that he was a bad prospect coming out at all. He just is clearly a downgrade from Tucker Kraft, because most tight ends would be a downgrade from Tucker Kraft. Like, Kraft was good in fantasy football because of what he can do after the catch. He's got that George Kittle ability in him. He's the current tight end leader in yards after catch over expected. And he ranked behind only George Kittle last year within that metric. And that's really key because it means that he's going to be really efficient per catch. And he has been. But that also means that he can get away with some lower target share games and still be fantasy viable. I don't think people realize that Tucker Kraft only has 3 games this year with a 20% target share, which honestly should be a crime. But he has a 20% target share per game rate when you exclude last week when he was hurt. Luke Musgrave is not as good of a player. I don't think we can assume that he sees the same kind of target share that Tucker Kraft was seeing, especially as the Packers wide receivers get healthier. And if you're not getting the same yak profile, how can we be so confident that Luke Musgrave is going to be like a week in, week out tight end 1? Someone who can give you spiked weeks, who can find the end zone for sure. I just think he's part of that like high-end tight end 2 streaming group right now. And there's a lot of those players. You can add him. You can see what he's about. But that should be more of the expectation. Like a high-end tight end 2. Even a mid-range tight end 2. And if he exceeds those expectations, great. But I don't think that you should be sitting here with Luke Musgrave today thinking that you have your answer at tight end. Because very few tight ends can do what Tucker Kraft can do. And Kraft, while he was an answer, it took a lot for him to be that answer. This next question is from @XL9PX on Twitter. It says, hey JJ, I'm currently 6-3 and in second place. I was just offered Amari and Hampton for my Jaylen Warren. Should I accept? Hampton is rumored back week 13. I'm afraid he gets shut down though. I won't lie, the quotes surrounding Amari and Hampton this week, they're not exactly getting me excited. When you look at the reporting on this, every news site is saying that Jim Harbaugh said that he doesn't expect Hampton to return until after their week 12 bye, which is true. But I think the way that people interpret that, they seem to think it means Hampton is just going to be back in week 13. But what Harbaugh said was that he doesn't expect Hampton's activation window to be open until after the week 12 bye. That doesn't mean week 13. It just means after the bye. It doesn't mean that Hampton will absolutely be back after that bye. Could he be? Yeah, of course. But that's adding more risk to your team if you're solely buying into a week 13 return. And when he's back, he's coming back to a banged up offensive line and the potential for a little bit more of a split than what we were seeing before he got injured. Look, you guys know I love Amari and Hampton. And if you can send off some bench players to get him, fine. But I would imagine Jaylen Warren is starting for your team. And just because you're in second place now does not mean that you're a lock for a first round bye in your league. And those buys are very, very important. Not only that, even when Hampton's back, Warren could just outscore him. He's seeing a great workload. So in my rest of season rankings, which are available on Patreon, I've got Warren well ahead of Hampton. There's some concern about Warren, which I'll get to in a second. But I don't think this is a move that I would currently make. The last question this week is an email from Magic Mike FF on Twitter. I know that's confusing, but he signed the email with his Twitter handle. It says, "Hi JJ, longtime fan, first time question. In the past, I've heard you talk about introducing variants if your team is bad or if you lost starters. I've lost Hampton, Neighbors, and Kraft on a myriad of rosters that were good. If you were in that situation, who are some high variance affordable guys you may target this week, assuming you are on the playoff bubble? And how would you approach it as a concept, considering we're still aiming to get first, not just fifth?" Magic Mike FF. I think one thing to keep in mind here is that you don't need to find players who are super volatile, who are either zeros or they're 20s. You don't need to do that if you're in this kind of situation. You can do that, but you don't have to. Instead, you might want to find players who have good schedules upcoming, but maybe worse schedules in the fantasy playoffs. And you can even mention that to the people that you're negotiating with. I said I'd talk about Jaylen Warren again. He's a perfect example of this. The Steelers get the Chargers, Bengals, Bears, Bills, Ravens, and Dolphins over their next 6 games. That's a great schedule for Jaylen Warren. But then it's the Lions and the Browns to close out the fantasy season. So someone with Warren, maybe they're a one-loss team, hypothetically. They might want to think more deeply about those week 16 and 17 matchups. Maybe even sell high. But someone who's more of a fringe team, more of a fringe playoff team, Warren could smash over the next month and a half. And generally speaking, I don't think Jaylen Warren is a sell. I think he's more of a buy than a sell. And then there's also injury stuff. Aaron Jones is a great example of this. Jones isn't getting in practices, but he said that he's going to play on Sunday. At the time of this recording, that's my general expectation. So that injury that he has, it can make him more approachable when trying to trade for him. And honestly, most managers just don't really care about Aaron Jones right now. And then on the flip side, you can lean into injuries that are currently happening, that are giving players a more short-term boost. Now, I'm recording this on Thursday. I have no idea if Ramondre Stevenson's going to play this weekend or not. But Travion Henderson, the Patriots actually have the best schedule over the next 4 weeks for running backs, according to my numbers. They get the Bucks, Jets, Bengals, and Giants before their bye. Kamani Vidal, maybe you want to lean into last week of just being a bad game, and that Hampton is more injured than what's being reported. So maybe Kamani Vidal is someone that you want to target right now too. At wide receiver, here are some teams with good short-term schedules that might have affordable pass catchers. Now, I'm talking median opponent by adjusted fantasy points allowed over the next 4 weeks. So it could be 3 games if one of those teams has a bye in that 4-week stretch. But we've got the Giants, the Eagles, if you could buy low on Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown for whatever reason. Denver's another one, but they do play on Thursday night, and you won't hear this until Friday. And then maybe even Tampa Bay, like a Tez Johnson type. Their schedule isn't amazing, but it's slightly above average. So those are just some names to think about. But like I said, you can obviously lean into the profiles that are more boom bust. Maybe guys who haven't worked out this year, but have gotten it done in the past, like Jamison Williams. Detroit actually has a pretty good short-term schedule too. But he obviously is a high variance player. But maybe some of that favorable variance hits more often. That's how I generally look at this stuff though. It's a great exercise to go through. You evaluate your own team, you see where it's at, you see what you might need, and then you think through situations that may be better now or maybe better later. But hopefully some of those names will get you headed in the right direction. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. As usual, I got a Late Round Perspectives episode dropping later today. Hope you give that a listen. And then I'll be live on YouTube, youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. I'll be live at 1 p.m. Eastern with David Kitchen to do the Late Round Fantasy Football Show. And if you miss that show, it'll drop in this podcast feed tomorrow morning. Have a great weekend, everyone. I'll catch you next week.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than Saquon Barkley, the NFL's reigning leading rusher. I'm also the NFL's leading husher. Shh, hush up back there. Wow, I might have just set the hushing record. Well, almost. For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Investment Services Corporation, member FINRA, Columbus, Ohio.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get chicken parmesan delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.